All right, interesting. I'm just going to ask a few questions on these. I'm going to start with the divisions in college football. Who's the best division? Like, give me the top three divisions that you have.
Well, since I knew this question was coming, I prepared a little bit deeper than the best division. All right. I went all the way down the list, okay? And this, some people are very interested in this. Some people are bored to death about division talk. I happen to think it's very interesting, but I don't think it's an indicator of the top team. For instance, we have seen Clemson emerge from an atrocious ACC Coastal and win the national championship. Like, I don't like characterizing divisions as weak or bad or all these other things. All right, I don't like characterizing teams as weak or bad or any of these things, because there might be a great team and the rest of the division thinks, is that the great team's fault? No, not necessarily. Same reason, you're going to be held accountable. But ultimately, I don't like to characterize entire leagues, entire divisions as really, really weak, because it can all flip in a weekend, like we've seen it happen on so many different occasions. However, without taking the filibuster and removing it for a moment, let's go into the best divisions / leagues in college football. Now, there's 8, because the Pac-12 has abandoned divisions, obviously, and we know the Big 12 hasn't had divisions in forever. So, taking that into account, you have 8 groupings of teams that you can rank at the moment. Number 8 is the ACC Coastal. It is, I don't want to say it's bad, but it's the weakest right now division in college football. Right now, North Carolina currently sits atop. They're 3-0. They're ranked number 22 in the AP poll. But I don't think any of us that have watched North Carolina, even though they're 6-1, I've been impressed with some of the things they've done, but they still have a lot of issues. And it was best on display against App State, and that was early. But they didn't play great at times in other games as well. I think North Carolina is a dangerous team, but I think North Carolina is an incomplete team. But the rest of it, Georgia Tech, Pitt, Miami, Duke, Virginia Tech. I mean, all these teams, for the most part, beyond North Carolina, you only have 2 teams in the division that are above 500. One of them's Duke, all right, who hasn't beaten really anybody so far. The other's Pitt, who's been really up and down this year. And you could argue there were a couple games they won and maybe shouldn't have. So Pitt, to me, very inconsistent as well. So the Coastal right now in the ACC is number 8. Number 7 is the Big Ten West. The thing that's propping up the Big Ten West right now is Illinois. I'm a big believer in Illinois. I love how they play. I love both lines of scrimmage, defensive line, especially on the interior, offensive line, coupled with that run game. I love Illinois. I think Purdue's pretty good as well. Those 2 teams kind of propping up a division that has been really disappointing. Nebraska's currently 3rd in the division. That should tell you all you need to know. Minnesota's 1-2 in the league and 4-2 overall, but Minnesota's been really lethargic the last couple weeks. I thought they might be able to hang their hat at the top of the division, but it hasn't really materialized the last couple weeks. Even though Mo Ibrahim the last week was back, didn't make enough of a difference against a really good Illinois team. Northwestern, Wisconsin, the league from top to bottom is just flat out not very good. So they are right now, I think, the 7th in regards to divisions in college football. Number 6, the Pac-12, the entirety of the league. Now propped up right now very much by UCLA. Big question marks with me about where UCLA ultimately ends up. Oregon, currently in the AP poll, is 10. I'm not a believer in Oregon. They get a win this week, I'll be a believer. But I'm not right now at this point. They're solid. They've done a good job bouncing back, but I'm not sold on what the Ducks are currently. At number 12 in the AP polls, USC. I've had issues with USC's defense all year long. I think they've forced a ton of turnovers, but that cannot continue. And, of course, they got last week against number 15, Utah, who I think is good, but has a lot of issues on defense. I mean, I don't know how you stir it up. That was supposed to be their bread and butter, and yet their defense has been terrible based on preseason expectations. Then you go on down the list, I think Oregon State's pretty good. I think Washington's pretty good. But beyond that, it's ugly. Colorado, Cal, Arizona State, Arizona, Stanford. I mean, we're not talking about a good quality collection, nor is there a lot of great depth in the league. So the Pac-12, to me, is sitting there at number 6. The ACC Atlantic is sitting there at number 5. I like the ACC Atlantic. They have a bunch of teams that are currently ranked in the top 25 with Clemson, with Syracuse, with Wake Forest, and with NC State. Well, I talked about it earlier. I think NC State's about to drop like a bad habit. I like their defense. I don't like their offense. So I think they're in major trouble. Syracuse, we're going to find out this week they play Clemson. I'm not sold on Syracuse. I'm impressed with what they've done defensively. I think they've taken advantage of teams and had some opportunistic wins for sure, but I'm not sold on them. And you look at the back half of their schedule, man, it is a gauntlet from this point forward. Impressed with what they've done to this point. They're deservingly ranked 14th in the AP poll, but they could drop quickly if things get sideways this week on the road at Clemson. Wake Forest, I'm a believer in. I think Wake Forest will be there at season's end. They have an excellent quarterback. They have a really unique offense. They have a really good passing attack, and I think they'll be there 9-3, 10-2 at season's end. So anyone that beats Wake Forest, that would be a really, really good win. Florida State, I think, is pretty good. Boston College, I don't know what to make of them. Don't love them, to be honest with you. And then Louisville is always dangerous, but Louisville's too inconsistent for my liking to be able to get on board with them. So I have them currently, and that's a pretty solid nucleus, but I said two teams that are currently ranked. I don't think they're going to be ranked at season's end in Syracuse and NC State. I think there will be two ranked teams at season's end in Clemson and Wake Forest, but everybody else I think is just okay at this point. So I'd have the ACC Atlantic at 5. At 4, I have the SEC West. And that's probably going to be, whoa, hang on a second, bells and whistles going off. The SEC West? Yeah, that's right. The SEC West right now. I think Ole Miss is legit. I think Bama's legit. I think A&M is disappointing. I'm not sold on LSU. I think LSU has played better last week, but they looked awful 2 weeks ago against Tennessee. And then you look at Mississippi State. If I continue to get up and down performance, it's going to be tough for me to gauge. You can make a case that Auburn's arguably the worst team in the SEC, and then Arkansas has been really up and down as well. The SEC West, like I said, I think there's two really good football teams, three teams that I never know what I'm going to get from. 4 teams I never know what I'm going to get from, and then one team that's just flat out not very talented. That's Auburn. That's why they sit there currently at number 4. At number 3, I have the Big Ten East. Big Ten East, I think, is very, very good. 2 of my top 4 teams are in the Big Ten East. Ohio State and Michigan. Huge believer in those 2 teams. Also, think that Maryland and Penn State are pretty good, like I talked about earlier. I think Penn State, really solid football team. But Maryland, Michigan State, Indiana, and Rutgers, the bottom 4, I'm not sure yet. Top 2, even the top 3, very, very solid. Bottom 4, not so much, which is why they currently sit at number 3. Number 2, I have the SEC East. 5th place right now is Florida. Florida beat Utah. Utah is one of the reasons why I like the Pac-12. All right? That should tell you all you need to know. Florida is 4-3 and not playing very good football, at least based on last week. The bottom is atrocious in Vanderbilt and Missouri, but if you look at Georgia, who I have at 3, Tennessee, who I have at 2, Kentucky, who I think is a top 20 football team and could very easily be in the top 10, if not for having lost their quarterback for a game and having played awful with critical errors in critical moments against Ole Miss. I think they're a really good football team. So 3 excellent football teams, and then 2 really good football teams in South Carolina and Florida. Even though Florida's a little bit up and down, they still have a great win. So it's difficult to ignore what they could potentially be. And then finally, the top dog right now as far as groupings of teams in college football is the Big 12. Now you're going to say, well, how do you come up with that? There's might not even be a college football playoff team in the bunch. Yeah, that's why I love them. Because the Big 12, you never know what you're going to get in a given weekend, man. I mean, it is as entertaining and as exciting and as closely compact group as you're going to find. Shoot, last week, West Virginia's on life support, the worst team in the Big 12, and they knock off last year's champion. Iowa State is a drop pass away from knocking off a team that's sitting at 3-1 in the league and might be the best team in the league overall in Texas. You have TCU, who I have at number 5. You have Kansas State, who would be nipping on the heels of any team in the top 10 for me. I think they're a top 12, top 13 football team. Huge believer in what Kansas State's done. Oklahoma State, like I told you earlier, really like them. I mean, this is a really awesome collection of football teams. And I don't know if you can go 1 through 10 and tell me a bad football team. I don't think there's one. Every other league, every other division can point to, all right, they're bad. All right, fine. That's a bad football team. That's a bad football team. That's a bad football team. I can't name a bad football team right now in the Big 12. Top to bottom, it's as strong as anyone, and that's why they currently sit right now. Top my grouping power rankings, conference division power rankings, is the Big 12.